On November 28, 1953, a man fell from the window of room 1018A at the Statler Hotel in New York City. His name was Frank Rudolph Olson, a 43-year-old government bacteriologist, a father of three, a man who had spent his career working in classified biological research for the United States Army. His death was ruled a suicide. 22 years later, a family reading a government report about CIA abuses discovered that 9 days before Frank Olson's death, he had been secretly dosed with LSD at a CIA retreat, without his knowledge and without his consent. He was one of hundreds of subjects in a classified program so secret that even its name, MKUltra, would not reach the American public for decades. His son Eric spent the next 50 years trying to determine whether his father had been murdered. Project MKUltra was authorized by CIA Director Allen Dulles on April 13, 1953. The context was the Korean War and a specific terror. American prisoners of war returning from captivity were making public confessions to germ warfare, to crimes, to beliefs they had never held. The CIA's analysis was that the Soviet Union and China had developed techniques for controlling the human mind, methods that could break a person's will, implant false beliefs, and manufacture confessions on demand. Whether this assessment was accurate is still debated by historians. What it produced was a decision: the United States needed to understand these techniques, and it needed to develop countermeasures and potentially its own versions. Allen Dulles approved a research program under the codename MKUltra, 150 separate subprojects, conducted across 80 institutions including 44 universities, 12 hospitals, 3 prisons, and dozens of pharmaceutical companies. Most of the researchers involved did not know they were working for the CIA. The range of research conducted under MKUltra was extraordinary in its scope and in its disregard for human subjects. Subjects were given LSD, mescaline, heroin, barbiturates, and combinations of multiple drugs, frequently without their knowledge or consent. Experiments used electroconvulsive therapy at voltages far beyond clinical use. Subjects were subjected to sensory deprivation in isolation tanks for days at a time. Hypnosis was used to attempt to implant commands. Researchers explored whether people could be made to perform actions under hypnosis that they would consciously refuse. Sleep deprivation was used in conjunction with drug administration. In one subproject, Operation Midnight Climax, the CIA operated safe houses in San Francisco and New York where prostitutes were employed to lure men, who were then secretly administered LSD while CIA officers observed their behavior through one-way mirrors. The men had no idea what was happening to them or who was watching. Among the most damaging MKUltra subprojects was the work conducted by Dr. D. Ewan Cameron, president of the American Psychiatric Association, president of the World Psychiatric Association, and a physician of international standing. Cameron's research, funded covertly through a CIA front organization, was conducted at McGill University's Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal. His theory was that mental illness could be cured by first depatterning a patient, destroying existing personality structures through massive doses of electroconvulsive therapy, drug-induced sleep lasting months, and sensory deprivation, and then psychically driving a new, healthier personality into the blank slate using recorded messages played on loop during sleep. Patients admitted to the Allen Memorial Institute for Depression or Anxiety Disorders left with destroyed memories, permanent neurological damage, and no recollection of months or years of their lives. Several patients lost the ability to speak. None of them had consented to experimental treatment. Most had no idea CIA funding was involved. The Canadian government ultimately paid compensation to Cameron's surviving victims. The CIA has never done so. Frank Rudolph Olson was not a CIA officer, he was a civilian scientist employed by the U.S. Army's Special Operations Division at Fort Detrick, Maryland, working on classified biological weapons research. In November 1953, he attended a work retreat at a remote Maryland cabin along with 10 colleagues and several CIA officials, including Sidney Gottlieb, the chemist who directed MKUltra's drug research program. On the second evening, Gottlieb added LSD to the Cointreau liqueur without telling anyone. Olson and several others were dosed without their knowledge. most experienced strange effects and recovered. Olson had a severe reaction. He became agitated, withdrawn, and deeply disturbed. Those who were with him described a man who seemed fundamentally altered, not temporarily affected by a drug, but genuinely changed. He returned home to his family clearly unwell. He told his wife there was something he needed to deal with. He did not tell her what it was. In the 9 days between Frank Olson's dosing and his death, the CIA made a series of decisions that his son Eric has spent a lifetime examining. Olson was taken to see a CIA-connected psychiatrist in New York, Dr. Harold Abramson, who had no psychiatric credentials but was a key MKUltra researcher. Abramson's notes describe Olson as confused and exhibiting psychotic state. Olson called home and told his wife he had made a terrible mistake without specifying what it was. He was then accompanied to New York by CIA officer Robert Lashbrook, who booked a room at the Statler Hotel. On the morning of November 28, at approximately 2:30 a.m., Olson crashed through the closed, latched window of room 1018A and fell to his death on the pavement below. Lashbrook, who was in the same room, called Gottlieb before calling the police. The death was ruled a suicide. The Olson family was told Frank had had a breakdown. They were not told about the LSD. The CIA's handling of Frank Olson's death was a cover-up from the first phone call. Gottlieb and Lashbrook consulted CIA legal counsel before contacting law enforcement. The CIA did not disclose Olson's LSD dosing to investigators, to the coroner, or to his family. The death was processed as a straightforward if tragic suicide of a disturbed government employee. The Olson family received a workman's compensation payment standard for government employees who died in the line of duty, and were told only that Frank had suffered a mental breakdown. Alice Olson raised her 3 children without knowing what had happened to their father. It was not until 1975, when the Rockefeller Commission's report on CIA abuses was published and listed Olson among subjects who had been given LSD without consent, that the family learned what the CIA had done. CIA Director William Colby met with the Olson family personally, apologized, and arranged for them to receive $750,000 in compensation in exchange for agreeing not to pursue legal action. The family's compensation settlement in 1975 did not satisfy Eric Olson, Frank's son, who had been 9 years old when his father died. Eric became a clinical psychologist and spent decades trying to reconstruct what had happened. In 1994, he obtained a court order to exhume his father's remains, which had been buried at a military cemetery in Maryland. The forensic examination was conducted by James Starrs, a professor of forensic science at George Washington University and one of the most respected forensic pathologists in the country. Starrs's findings contradicted the 1953 suicide ruling. He found evidence of a hematoma, a bruise consistent with blunt force trauma, on Frank Olson's skull above the left eye. This injury, Starrs concluded, was inconsistent with a fall through a window and was more consistent with a blow to the head delivered before the fall. His formal conclusion, the evidence was consistent with a homicide. The New York District Attorney's Office considered reopening the investigation. It ultimately declined. Investigative journalist Seymour Hersh, who had broken the My Lai massacre story, became interested in the Olson case in the 1990s. His research, reported in The New Yorker, developed a theory about why Olson might have been killed rather than simply silenced through compensation. According to Hersh's sources, Olson had been present at and troubled by CIA biological weapons experiments conducted in Germany in the early 1950s, experiments that involved the testing of lethal agents on human subjects. Olson had reportedly expressed serious reservations about this work and may have been considering whether to report what he knew to congressional oversight. If accurate, this meant that Frank Olson was not simply a man who had had a bad LSD reaction. He was a man who had knowledge of potentially criminal CIA activities and was showing signs of being unwilling to protect that knowledge. The CIA has never confirmed or denied Hersh's reporting. The relevant files remain classified. In January 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of all MKUltra files. The order was executed comprehensively. Shredding machines worked through thousands of documents, and the records of 150 research programs, scores of institutions, and an unknown number of human subjects were deliberately destroyed before any outside investigation could reach them. The program might have remained almost entirely hidden had a CIA employee not misfiled 7,000 documents in a financial records building at a separate location. These documents, discovered in 1977 during a search for unrelated materials, provided the basis for the Senate's 1977 MKUltra hearings and for most of what is now publicly known about the program. They represent a fraction estimated at less than 1% of the program's total documentation. The subjects who were harmed, the experiments that were conducted, the institutions that participated, and the names of individuals who were dosed without consent are largely lost. The destruction of evidence was comprehensive and intentional. It largely succeeded. The Senate's 1977 hearings into MKUltra were hampered by the same fact that hampers every examination of the program: most of the evidence is gone. The number of people who were unwitting subjects of MKUltra experiments will never be fully known. The full range of institutions involved will never be catalogued. The specific experiments conducted in the missing 99% of records will remain unknown. Frank Olson continued investigating his father's death for the rest of his life. He died in 2023, 76 years old, without a definitive legal determination of what happened in room 1018A. Frank Olson's death remains officially classified as a suicide. The CIA has never acknowledged whether Frank Olson was murdered. It has never released the files that might answer the question. The compensation payment made to the Olson family in 1975 was conditional on not pursuing legal action, a condition that effectively insulated the CIA from any accountability for whatever happened on November 28, 1953. The CIA ran 150 research programs across 80 institutions, dosing unwitting American citizens with drugs, erasing memories with electricity, and watching the results through one-way mirrors. When investigators got close, Richard Helms ordered everything destroyed. What survived is 1% of what existed. Frank Olson knew something. 9 days after being secretly drugged by the same program, he went through a 13th floor window. His death is still officially a suicide. Subscribe to Operation Redact.